my name is Janice Peng. I am the Operations Manager at Asian American Christian Collaborative. This conversation is brought to you by 10 by 10. It's hard to see the next generation come back to the faith. We are here gathered with a few of our wonderful church and ministry leaders to talk about what it looks like to reach out to the youth in the Asian American context. Thank you for joining us today. Can you share a little bit about your backgrounds?
Yeah, I'm Ruby Varghese, and I serve as a pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church. And I'm also a spiritual director and a current student at Fuller Theological Seminary as a marriage and family therapist. And I grew up second generation Indian American. My parents immigrated from Kerala, India.
Yeah, my name is Eric Peng. I am a second generation Chinese American, born and raised in Palatine. I reside in Chicago, where I am the chaplain at the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center. We're about 200 youth on a daily basis who are incarcerated. And so, my background is, predominantly in the Korean American church, working as a pastor for about 12 years before transitioning into a missionary chaplain.
My name is Sherine. I serve currently as a missions pastor at Tapestry LA Church. It's predominantly Asian American church. I oversee both local and global outreach work. I am Sri Lankan by origin. I was born in Lebanon. I grew up in Sri Lanka and moved to the States for college and kind of stayed on from there.
Great. So we're here to talk about outreach to youth. One question I have for you is, how can church leaders and church communities effectively engage and retain young Asian Americans who may feel disconnected from traditional church settings or leadership?
Yeah, I've been a youth pastor for over 25 years. And I think our students just want to be heard. And so engaging in dialogue so that students don't feel like they're simply coming to consume what the church has to offer, but they are actively participating, that they're respected, that their opinion matters, that they're valued, and that there's trusted relationships. Kids want to know that the people that they're around are people that they can truly trust, and that we'll hear them out, but also be able to challenge them too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like the whole idea that, kids are seen made in the image of God. So I'm Chinese American. I was saved at a Korean American church, and that's where my network is around. And I've seen, just youth, seeing the youth group just as a place where, we'll plug in somebody that's a warm body that can oversee the kids. And then later on, as kids grow up and they don't see the college ministry or even, adult ministry thriving, they're like, what happened? It's like, where's the investment? Where was the opportunity? And when you're saying, being able to see the kids then being heard, being seen, is such an important process of giving that space to understand who they are culturally, as well as just the challenge of having them be seen and heard, and their input being taken seriously, and they can sniff out authenticity in so quickly. And so, how do we engage in relationship and building that bridge with the youth is such an important process.
I love that. I think I was an education pastor for 10 years. I think something that stands out to me to add to that is maybe even understanding their world. Oftentimes we, demonize their world, right? And whether it's social media or whatever it is that is part of their world. But something about entering their world and engaging in their world, I think it makes them feel safe and at home. So that's something that I would love to add to that as well. Yeah.
So, what are some ways that churches can do it in a way that can really reach them, like mentorships or programming or Bible studies? In your experience, what do you think are some ways that churches can do that?
Yeah, I think the ways I've seen it modeled in the church is a way to a kid's heart is through food. And so having meals together where it's a safe environment to have conversation and share stories together. I also think testimonies are so powerful. It's really hard to get to know each other on a Sunday morning or as you're passing by throughout their busy schedules, but taking intentional time to lean in, to listen, and to engage in dialogue. And I do think mentorship's a great way for that to happen. But even through what happens on a Sunday morning in a service, and how culture, language, art is valued, and represented, I think helps kind of bridge that gap between the older generation and the younger.
I think to that, I would add maybe investing in younger leaders. Our church youth group, we've been at like 15 for years. Been kind of stuck in that number. But recently we hired a young pastor. And it's just, they're growing, it's busting, I guess. That's what they would say. I just feel like the kids love it and they understand their pastor, vice versa. And he's from their world. And I don't know, there's something about investing in young leaders and giving them the opportunity, even maybe when we feel like they might not be ready.
Yeah, I think there's like relational investment as well. I love what you guys are saying, like the whole idea of like coming in, building that relationship, like just get to know the kid, who they are, what clicks with them, what they're invested in, what they are interested in. And I think mentorship can't be just preaching at the kid. That's like the thing where so many people come in, they think like so even at my facility, like I've had churches come in preaching at the kid for like an hour, thinking they did something positive and walk out. They never had a conversation, never had that dialogue with them sitting. And I love that food idea. So I have churches come in, bring food, and just have a space where they're playing games. And then for like 10 minutes, just sharing a devotional or just even a testimony, just sharing about their life and they're connecting with the kids at a very practical level. I think that's such a powerful place to be instead of like the traditional, I'm going to stand up here, preach at you for whatever time frame. But to kind of be in a dialogue circle where kids can share their ideas and not be told that they're wrong, but to kind of draw out of their conversations and connect them to, just practically their spiritual, physical, mental, emotional life, as a whole.
I think mentorship can be about a mutual learning versus on a top-down,
Amen.
And our kids have so much to teach our elders too, and to challenge them and their ways of thinking and seeing the world. And I think it will help in bridging that understanding of one another if we come at it with a heart of mutuality.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm hearing a running theme of kids, they need to be seen, they need to be heard. What can a church or church communities do to help young Asian Americans feel like they are a part of the church community and not just an outsider?
I would say maybe understanding their world in that, as an Asian American, you are in a liminal space. There's this part of you where you inherited from your family, a culture and a worldview. You are also living in another worldview. You're in between this like space of liminality. And often kids, they fear that space. I think creating safe spaces where you can be both. And the in-between is a messy, beautiful, and it's exactly where God intends for you to be. And I think creating language and spaces into that space, I feel like has been helpful. Seeing children understand, like you can be Korean American. It's part of who you are. You do not need to be American specifically or Korean or dismiss one or the other, but embrace it fully. That's something that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at my life growing up in the church, I needed a model. I needed the church to talk about why my voice mattered in the church and that I wasn't just there to receive and to be quiet, but that my whole body mattered in the church. And so I think developing leadership, giving opportunities, and not just as a a representation, but truly valuing what this generation has to say. And that takes a lot of culture shift. And so I think that's part of our discipleship is thinking through our cultural competency and our understanding of one another in order to make room for our students to lead in the church.
Yeah, I think as like a second generation I'm Chinese American, but with just the context of Korean American, Asian, East Asian American too, we see that it's still a young church. It's so diverse. Asian American, such a diverse, super diverse. And our panel is like super diverse here. It's just like the idea that first gen, the immigrant church is such it's been there, but we're the first generation here in America and processing. And even for me, just as a second generation Asian American, it's such confusing identity to, we're just trying to figure out what that looks like in our culture to how to engage. And even for my daughter, I'm passing along to her as a third generation child who is Chinese American as well as Korean American. And how does that identity shift for her? And I feel like it's such an important thing to help the next generation process their identity, embracing it, and the culture, the language, and everything that we're seeing in the church. We need to process that well, and how do we pass down our faith well to this next generation? And I think that's discipleship. That's building up young leaders, voicing and hearing their voice, and embracing that they're going to make mistakes, but to understand that they don't have to be perfect in the way that they're being raised up, but to equip them and to walk alongside them, to mentor them. I think is such an important piece that we need to do well. If we're not doing that well, I think we're doing a disservice to the next generation.
So what are some unique challenges that you see in young Asian Americans in terms of challenges in terms of facing their faith, identity, purpose, and belonging within the church? And how can the church respond? Or to what degree do you think the church has or hold collective responsibility in addressing or shaping Asian American identity in a faith context?
I feel like celebrating who they are. That's a big piece. You know what I mean? You see, when you talk to a young Asian American, you see this like identity crisis. You're just like, I don't know where I belong. You know what I mean? And there's this like discomfort and unease. But I think like creating spaces where you celebrate, like, this is what God's made you to be. And this is like a community, like a collective thing. You know what I mean? Like this journey doesn't have to be alone, but we can be together and we're one family. And I think celebrating and creating those spaces could be a start way, possibly.
I think it's a really challenging time for students growing up in the church because they're living in this dual world of both Western and Eastern culture. And I know growing up second generation Indian American, I always thought one was good and one was bad, depending on what context I was in. Right. And so I totally agree. I think finding ways to celebrate our identity and to hear stories of courage, of strength, of leadership, need to continue to be embedded in the hearts and minds of our students because they so easily forget. I also think it's just a challenging time to grow up. And so I'd hope that community would be a space to bring doubt. And so that there would be safe spaces to ask questions and to challenge and to talk about what they're seeing contextually and how to live out their faith. It can be really scary and lonely. And if they're not talking about it, then they process that in isolation, which we don't want to see. That causes them to leave communities they don't feel safe in.
I think our parents being first generation, and just my experience with culture and faith, like first generation church has a lot of trauma, and then it passes down to second generation, and I think it's so tied. I've seen a lot of churches, different leaders to kids facing so much trauma, and even my kids at my facility. I think one thing that we see is that we really need to address the trauma, that everything isn't like peachy and clean and just ministry looks a certain way, but to understand that, man, we have a collective responsibility of holistically ministering to the Asian American community as a whole, from first generation to second generation to everything in between. I think we need to have a holistic way of addressing issues of the church leadership to the kids, learning what trauma is and how it affects them, and to heal and to grow. And that's why I think kids are hurting, and we need opportunities and services to really address the hurt and the pains that the kids face, and to see the church care for them holistically and to carry them in their walk of faith, and to see Jesus as he ought to see, a loving, compassionate, kind Savior. Yeah.
So you mostly grew up in a monocultural church context, and now you've had experience and served in different or multicultural contexts. How has that shaped you? And what do you wish you could have seen growing up from your pastors and your church communities that would have helped shape your faith identity and your Asian American identity at the youth?
Yeah, for me, I'm Chinese American, born in Chinese Christian, a Chinese household that wasn't Christian, and found the Lord when I was 16 years old at a Korean American church in the Chicagoland area. I was the only Chinese American at my congregation there, and I think what was positive was the youth pastor really saw who I was and really invested in me, really invested as a mentor. I saw the potential that I didn't see for myself. And it was kind of through the conviction through my pastor. He kind of spoke into my life, even thinking about full-time ministry. And I said no at the beginning, but I was like, wow, this is the first person that's actually seen me, understands how I was wired and what I was like really passionate about, which was serving God at that time. And I think it was the first time that I was fully trying to figure out my Asian American identity, and to be able to latch onto what my parents was just like, you work hard, you just go, you better do well in school and speak English, and just kind of focus on that part of just assimilation. I felt that the Korean American congregation actually allowed me to embrace an Asian American identity for the first time, and so I latched on hard into Korean culture, and I love what Korean culture really brought into this familiarity of that we're family. So like the whole idea, you're calling the older people, older brother, older sister, to the older generation, you're calling them uncle, aunt, in the ways they do. And I think it was it's a beautiful way of understanding collectivism in the way that Asian Americans can really understand. I think it allowed me to kind of shift from like this American identity of being very hyper individualistic to understand that, man, like we're here together. This whole fabric of us as a spiritual family, as a spiritual community, we are here invested together. And I think, that's what really shaped me, was the investment, being seen, and allowing my giftings to be, just challenged and used, and it just kind of shaped my personality in that way.
Yeah, my upbringing was very different. My parents immigrated to the East Coast as kind of the first of their family, and so really didn't have a strong Indian community. So we commuted to church 2 hours away in New York City. And it was a Malayali Marthama church in New York City. And the experience was such a gift to be able to just learn history and culture, to have food and fellowship together. But I remember as a teenager sitting in the pews, just feeling very other. As a second generation kid who didn't know the language, didn't quite understand our culture because it wasn't an everyday experience for me. It was this Sunday thing or once a month. And so I never really felt seen. And it felt very isolating to be in the church. Then as we got older and life got busier, we got plugged into a local, predominantly white church. And yet again, as one of the few families of color, we just felt welcomed. People were nice to us, but did we truly belong? No one really asked about our culture, and traditions. I never saw it modeled or talked about, in any type of discipleship. And so that was another place where I felt like I just needed to assimilate to survive. And it was really challenging to understand who I was and how to live out my faith in those spaces. As I've gotten older and have gotten to serve in multi-ethnic churches, I think it's challenged me as a pastor and really valuing people's stories, taking time to listen, but also ways that we can honor that through our art and culture, through storytelling, and then also not simply having leadership as a representation, but truly valuing what the Asian experience is through leadership. And I remember one of my first Sundays serving at a church in Seattle. I got to serve an Indian girl who's 7 years old, adopted, and it was the first time she had seen an Indian American pastor. And, I just remembered, I want to invest in this girl's life, I want to take her out to a meal and hear her story, but also get to celebrate her culture and identity in intentional ways that you typically can overlook in church contexts or Christian communities. So, I think it's really opened my eyes to the realities of Asian kids in the church and wanting them to truly be seen.
For me, I guess similar to you guys, or maybe Ruby, I didn't actually grow up here. I was born in Lebanon, grew up in Sri Lanka. I moved here for college. So as a young college student, my first experience was at a white church, which is easy, it's pretty easy to feel like you're the outsider. My junior year was when I connected with a Korean American pastor who had just planted a church. That's a whole nother story. There was some kind of miscommunication, and on the first day I got hired, but I had no idea. As a young college student, I was alone without a family or a support system. Couple years into that journey, I also went through an immigration journey that was quite hard to navigate. And I think my journey serving at a Korean American church was that even though in some ways, yes, I do feel a sense of an outsider, like this is not, ethnically my community, but a sense of belonging and family, a sense of, that I am welcome here. I might not look the part, but I could be an insider here. And that's been just a beautiful but messy journey. And in some ways, as I process my own journey, I think a question that I've wrestled all my life is, where is home? And when I think of our young children or youth or college or next generation, I think that's a question I wrestle with again and again. Do you feel at home? In what ways can I enter your world and understand your world and engage in your world and make you part of this home? Or maybe even us building a home together.
So I'm hearing that everybody kind of had a, faith identity, or like just the Asian American identity struggle coming into terms, especially in the church context. Sherine, like, what do you think that church did to help you to really shape your identity and your sense of belonging? What things did they do well to really help you in your journey?
So for me, language was huge. I was born in Lebanon. I spoke French and Arabic first. Moved to Sri Lanka, had to learn Sinhalese, learn English. We were a colony of the British colony back then, and then moving here, language again. So I think I've never been able to articulate who I am, what my story is, and if I have anything to say. And I remember my first time our pastor gave me a chance to lead a devotions. I was just freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, do you know, public speaking is not my thing in English. Do you understand? I'm not from here. But taking chances, giving me opportunity and speaking really truth and identity into me, like you can get better. My pastor, suggested I take a class at seminary. Just try, just one. Not going to push you, just try it. And that turned into a journey of like, wow, I'm called into this. I could be part of this. You know what I mean? So speaking into spaces where there is maybe a glimpse of opportunity, that's been a powerful opportunity for me.
And Ruby, you shared a little bit about from one extreme to the other, or it was a monocultural church setting to a very isolating, where you were the only one of the only person of color at your church. Can you share a little bit about your faith journey in that, and just how that shaped your identity as an Asian American Christian?
Yeah, I think on one hand, it was very lonely, just kind of processing through my doubts and questions. I think as I got older, I started to really pay attention to the God who loves diversity, who is more complex than I ever thought. And so I think it opened up my imagination that, whoa, I'm like a part of this story. Like God loves me as an Indian American woman and values, like my whole being. And that God came not to just save some, but the whole world. And so I think the more I began to hear that and to see it modeled, it expanded my faith. My faith felt very small in my early years because I felt like there were such limitations on what was being communicated. And so, in that space, I began to ask questions, and it began to help me expand my understanding of who God was. And so, I challenge the church today to just continue to lean into the deep complexities of who God is, and to be able to talk about that. Yeah.
So, right now, currently, it's really cool to be Korean, like K-pop and the Korean culture is big with Squid-ins and everything. What role does cultural relevance play in outreach to young people, and how can churches remain faithful to the gospel while also connecting with younger generations?
I would say understanding their world again. I think it's a fun opportunity, I think sometimes though, the high church has demonized the world and, the secular sacred divide. But I think if Jesus was here, I think he would go to the people where they are, meet them where they are, engage in ways that is relevant. And like our rabbi, I think it's just such a great opportunity to engage, to imagine possibilities of how to engage with our context. I think of the arts, the movies, and the social media, and whatever the space is. What an opportunity would it be to activate all of God's people to engage and to be priests in the marketplace, in wherever they are.
Yeah, I remember I was serving at a Korean church in Seattle, and I remember one of our first Sundays, we had a congregational meeting, and we had japchae and bulgogi for lunch, and I'm like, I've never had anything other than a sandwich. And I think bringing like food, culture, art, like it's just a way of seeing each other in deeper ways and valuing the ways that God values us. And I think it's not just a, greeting on a Sunday, but it's like, we value you. This is your home. We want to be not just people that attend in a building, but we're family. And so we value all aspects of you, the things that you listen to, that you partake in. I think it just brings us into this space of unity, right? And just showing that we really care and love each other and long to connect in deeper ways.
So you shared about how social media and the arts can really help shape that cultural identity within the church. How do you see the role of technology and social media in reaching out to young people in the Asian American community? And how can the church create community through technology and social media?
I think it's understanding both the good and bad of social media. I think oftentimes the narrative is social media is terrible. But I think it actually has a great potential in helping kids creatively, let out their emotions and expressions. It's been really fun to watch my teens that I get to work with, get to share in different ways, and through music or through dance, and get to bring their whole selves out that they usually don't get to. I also think social media is a way to educate. I know I learned so much by just scrolling and finding things about Indian history, or how to cook an Indian meal, different artists, different historians. And so I think this could be a great way to tell stories and to share different pieces of our identities as Asians.
Yeah, I think such an impactful thing to, media in America really lacks representation of, Asian Americans or just Asian folks on screen. And so I think taking the opportunity to utilize media, utilize platforms to highlight culture, to just creating safe spaces where people can come together, share who they are, what they, and how to express themselves. Some of my kids that I remember just doing youth ministry in general, just like some kids are so introverted. Like when you talk with them, man, they don't talk at all. But when you text with them, they go crazy. They, and you get, there's a personality that's there that's just not highlighted just because they're so introverted. But just tap into ways to communicate and to allow spaces to just engage them where they are. That's where Jesus would be. I think he would be using, Twitter and all these other things to engage with this community, right? And so I think we need to take those opportunities to reach this generation where they are, which is social media. It's just part of what we need to do, what the church needs to adapt to as Asian Americans. And so I think,
A couple things come to mind for me. One, I think, social media, like you said, could be a great platform for spiritual formation, right? But I think it's important to consider who our kids are listening to. Growing up in Sri Lanka, I thought, to be Christian is to be more white, right? So when I finally moved to California, I'm like, hallelujah, a little closer to Jesus. You know what I mean? And I think even if you consider some of the voices who have the platform to disciple our children, I think they hear perhaps one voice, right? Like perhaps the white voice, right? The white Christian voice that shapes them. And I think that's where the confusion is that, right? They hear this. And again, it's like, to be Christian, is it really to be white, right? But I think it's just such an opportunity as Asian American leaders for us to use that platform to speak identity, theologize, and to use it as a space of spiritual formation for our children.
Is there any other questions or comments you have about, final comments about how we can effectively reach the youth, specifically Asian American youth?
As Asian American, I think just serving and just kind of growing my faith. A lot of times, the whole idea is like, as Asian Americans, we're like devoted to the church. Everything that we do. I've seen it in the first generation, passed on to the second generation. Like your devotion is to like just the church and the four walls of the church. But for me, in my context as an Asian American, I was blessed to kind of be challenged to think outside of the four walls of the church. And I think with Asian Americans and just folks in general, we want to see how does faith really address it, and how is it relevant with the current issues of our society. And for me, like I would love to see, the church and Asian American Christians have the opportunity to go beyond the four walls of the church, to really engage in issues of justice, to having platforms of just volunteering in the brokenness of the world, and to see that Jesus is relevant. Jesus is relevant in your cities. He's relevant in your communities, and we have the opportunity to just shape this this next generation, as second generation, third generation Asian Americans, that we do have a voice. We do have giftings that we are ought to serve God with. And I think, just for me, I would love to see just Asian Americans, rather, just having a healthy understanding of what volunteering looks like. And so for me, just as a chaplain, I would love to see more Asian Americans kind of coming in and that being part of their spiritual formation is serving in the brokenness in their communities, and seeing that and having opportunities to do so.
Yeah, I think I would love to continue to bridge a gap between the generations. And like we've talked about today, I think just continuing to foster spaces of dialogue together about history, about celebration, about spaces of lament and oppression, the trauma that each of us holds in different ways, and to be able to tell that together and to find collective healing. I love your idea about serving and getting outside of our even our own cultural context to see others in ways that we can be advocating and seeking justice for other communities, especially other communities of color. We can tend to isolate ourselves and not be able to think about others' journeys. But also, I have a deep burden for leadership. I want this generation to know that they have a voice. And so any ways that we can be investing in them to lead in the church and in the world in more effective ways, I would love to do that. And so some of that is giving them examples. giving them opportunities to serve where it might be risky. But I just think about gifted Asian leaders that I've gotten to know and the people that have invested and taken a chance on them. And so I would love to see more of that happening, and for our Asian American churches to be inviting other Asians into their context to preach, to teach, to share, to serve together, to expand our kids' knowledge of the gospel of who Christ is. Yeah.
I would say, I think sometimes it's tempting to kind of pull back in our spaces of marginality. But I really think of upside down kingdom, where there is weakness, where there is marginalization. That's where the power of God's kingdom can be revealed and break through. And I feel like in some ways, perhaps our marginality is an opportunity for us to step into something more. And if we do, what could the church look like? And what could the next generation of Asian Americans and what they will inherit from us look like? So.
Well, thank you again for joining us today for this time of conversation and dialogue.